gentlemen, welcome to the Leadership Game 365 with myself, Mazibuko. Thank you so much. And as I said, good news earlier on before you joined. We are running a little bit late. Two of our colleagues could not make it due to the fact that they have got some bereavement at their families. But we've got Ungobane as a panelist, and OCC Nomsa is going to join us. And we've got our regulars right now that are part and parcel of this family. So we're going to get started. So colleagues, today's topic is all about family and home leadership. I think it's important, colleagues, to understand that we meet people on the street, be at school, on the road, and at work. And good news, we now expect people that they have been appointed in certain positions that they can lead. Secondly, Ngobane, is the fact that we come across people that have not been taught to be ethical. And you get this poor guy by the name of Mazibuko, who's now working for a particular company. You now expect him to do what his parents have never taught him, what his community has never taught him. So these are some of the things that I would want us to talk about. So our esteemed guest speaker is going to take us through that. But let me welcome our regulars as well, and also our colleagues on Facebook and YouTube. So you are welcome. And for those that are coming in for the first time, welcome as well. So without any further ado, I want to introduce our guest speaker. I first met him at ESCOM. I hope you still remember when I called me that day, when you guys took us through that, and you left me with a very good impression. So colleagues, he's trained in integral coaching, and is also a member of COMENSA, which is South African Board of Practice. He's also a member of the South African Institute of Electrical Engineers. He teaches transformational leadership at Stellenbosch Business School. And I know him to be a Christ-fearing man and a Christ-loving man with a great sense of humor. And I've been following him since then, since the time that I met we met him at ESCOM. But colleagues, he's got such a very rich profile. And in the interest of time, I just want to give a sense of his expertise before I hand over to him. Part of his expertise is executive coaching, leadership coaching, performance coaching, skills coaching, and team coaching, amongst others. You know, I just want to zoom into two of those expertise, good news, if you don't mind, on executive coaching, leadership coaching, and maybe performance coaching. And most of us, when we get given those positions or responsibilities, when we come back from, when we're coming from universities, we've got no idea what we're supposed to do. And some of our bosses as well, as you talk about performance coaching, they just tell us what to do, but the mandate is not very clear. We're just not quite sure what is the mandate. We fumble our way, and then for some reason or another, because we've got some good qualifications, we get given some leadership position without proper guidance. So I think it's important that we understand what's happening. But as we go through this today, my brother, I would want you, and I hope that you're going to try and basically show a golden thread between what happens from a home and family leadership point of view to the broader society and also in the corporate world, including politics. That being said, and I would want to hand over to yourself, my dear brother. You've got up until probably between, say, 16:45 to 17 before we basically have an open conversation. For the rest of us colleagues, if you are not involved in any conversation for now, please mute and switch off your camera. But for some of our guest speakers, also our guests, you are allowed to basically engage us via chat. We'll be pleased to hear from you. That being said, over to you, my brother. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Pat, and good day to all listeners on the channels that you are connected to. As you said, my name is Good News Kadogan, and I'm not going to dwell much on my profile because you've already done that. There are 4 aspects of leadership that I'm going to talk about. It's the leadership of the self, it's the leadership of others, it's the leadership of the mandate that we have, and it's also the awareness insofar as the world is concerned. Let me start with the leadership of the self. If one is going to be a great leader and be leader of other people, they need to be very good at knowing who they are. They need to be able to lead the self. So when I take my clients through this aspect of understanding the self and leading the self, I usually use a number of assessments. One of the great assessments that I use is the Enneagram. And the Enneagram is a 9-factor model. And each of those 9 aspects of the personality and the psychology of people, you find that it is also subdivided into 3 other subcategories. And in the end, you end up with 7 subtypes of personalities and psychologies that actually tell you what a person is likely to be like if they're aligned with a certain type. Broadly, there are 3 triads there. And some of us, as people, we come from an orientation towards the head.
Please, can
And
I
as
just
we orient,
interject, my brother? Can I ask our honored guest to basically mute, please, so that we do not disturb our guest speaker? Thanks. You may proceed, my brother.
All right. Okay, thank you very much. As I was saying, that those 3 subtypes or 3 triads of the 9 types are divided into the head, the heart, and the gut. And sometimes the gut brain we refer to as the body brain. So those of us who orient from the head, usually we use logic and rationality as a means of anchoring our thoughts, and that becomes our main center of intelligence. And usually the people who orient from the head, they have a very good sense of the connectedness of things from a rational point of view. But it doesn't mean that they don't have access to the heart, and neither does it mean that they don't have access to their body. But it is a high degree of self-awareness that allows us to access all of the 3 intelligence centers, which are the head, the heart, and the body. If then one orients from the heart, they usually use emotional connection with others, and they are driven by sadness, whilst the other triad that orients from the head is driven mainly by anxiety and fear. So the heart people, they use, or rather are driven by sadness and shame to a certain extent. And these emotions play a major role in terms of how we connect with other people. The gut people or the body people, they use intuition as a means of connecting with the world. And as they connect with the world, their major emotion is anger. Having said that, I don't want to sort of gravitate towards making this session or presentation to be about personality or the psychology, but it's just a very good way of connecting with what we are trying to do insofar as understanding the personality and psychology of people. That is what is going to help us to actually get there. Once then, as human beings, we are very much well aware of the self, and we are able to actually navigate both the gifts that we have, that we offer to the world, and the blind spots that we come with as we get into the world. You will find that it is going to be very easy for us to lead the self and to connect with other people. Having said that, it's not enough to just master the self. We have to be able to master relationships. And we master relationships by having a keen interest in the other people in our lives. If then that is the case, these other people in our lives, because we love them, because we've got a keen interest in making the relationships to work, we then get to study them and know them so that the agenda on the table that brings us together, whether it is a home agenda or a family agenda or a societal agenda, we are able to connect with these other significant people and everybody that we meet with a keen interest to see them as being worthy of love and belonging. Thirdly, it's about understanding the mandate. The mandate doesn't only start at work. As we grow up as siblings, as parents, even as uncles and aunts, we connect with our children, with our nephews, with our nieces in ways that are profound. And each family has got some kind of a collective mandate, things that they're trying to achieve that allow for the collective to be able to connect with each other, either as a clan or as any grouping that is an extended family. And in here, usually through debate, through connecting and communication, we are able then to form a collective pathway as to where we are trying to go. When we get into the workplace, strategy and all other forms of performance agreements help us to understand the mandate that is given to us so that in the end, we are able to manage the work situation. And again, going back to where we started, knowing the self, being able to lead the self, knowing the other, and being able to be comfortable with relational awareness and mastery, we then move on to understanding what brings us together. And the cherry on top is what I would refer to as world awareness. World awareness is understanding what makes the world to go around. For some people, it's money and material things. For some people, it's more than just money. At a basic level, it could be what makes the village go round. What is it that the chief of a village, for example, is trying to do? And how do the different clans and different tribes that live around a particular area, it could be a district, it could be a province, how do they interact and what is it that they are trying to achieve? How do they manage the resources that they have? And what is the major belief, or what are the kind of belief systems that bring these people together? Customary law, customs and practice, religion, spirituality, the secular type of work, the things that we do to achieve, to create wealth for these geographic areas that we live in, and collectives of people, they form then the values that become the anchor of our being. So it is that understanding of what is it that is important to me as an individual, what is important to the collective that I belong to, and what is important to the other collectives of people that we interact with. And because the world has become so small that even the war in Ukraine is affecting even a person who lives in a village in the rural Eastern Cape, there is more in terms of complexity that we have to face nowadays. And this worldview is developed and becomes an ever-developing thing because in the end, as the world has got all of its complexity, it becomes more difficult than it was maybe 1,000 years ago when we were just concerned with the being of our people in terms of close family, the chief in our village, and it almost ended there, apart from when there was migration of tribes from one area to another. So in the end, on a daily basis, we are confronted with what are your belief systems? When we answer to that question, we go through a lot of soul searching because our own personality and psychology will affect our beliefs. it will affect how we interact with the mandate that we have, how we set the agenda of getting there. So in conclusion, by bringing in what I bring to the party as a person in terms of my gifts and blind spots, and being aware of those, and pursuing certain relationships with everybody that I interact with in a methodical kind of way, in an intentional kind of way, I am able then to engage with whatever mandate that I have, whether it's a family and home kind of situation, or it's a business and work situation, even in a religious sense, from a worship point of view. And when all of these things come together, they then inform the pinnacle of who I am, my value system. And it is the values that I hold dear that will permeate through each and every encounter that I have on earth. How I deliver from a performance point of view, how I serve or not serve those I am with in terms of relationships, and how I do my work, and also how I hold my person, the person that is in me, in such a way that my self-esteem is intact, my ego doesn't get in the way of me doing the things that I need to do in order to excel in all of aspects of my life. So that is the essence of leadership for me, from where I sit. Leading self, leading others, leading within the mandate of what I'm doing, whether it's work or home, and then holding dear and expressing the values that hold my life together, so that in the end, everybody that knows me from all of these aspects. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to actually express what really leadership is all about, at home, at work, and in society in general.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed how you basically opened up. Thanks a lot. But the show is not about me, it's about fellow colleagues on the platform. So right now, I just want to invite my dear brother, Ngubane Johnson, just to comment on what Good News had said. I mean, you can comment or make some some questions. Ngubane?
Thank you very much. That was quite insightful, and thank you, Brother Good News. I think it resonates, what is being discussed resonates with me at a number of levels. At a spiritual level, we appreciate that family is the basic unit of society. So it is at family that we start to shape the leaders that we are going to produce going into the future. So when we talk about leading self, we are talking about the self concept that has to emanate or start from the home. And I will touch on the home issue, because I think if we're going to complain about the product that is out there in the society, we need to go to the root causes by and large. And I think family being the basic becomes important. But what I would like to tag on to is the self-leadership, because that self-leadership demands, amongst other things, that one, as Good News points out, one is in touch with self, that one is able to self-regulate, or rather start with self-identification. What is my identity as an individual? If I am going to lead at a basic level, I need to be able to have self-identity and be able to leverage that self-identity, be able to understand it, and be able to operate within it. But more than that, in that self-identity, there needs to be things that are offshoots, self-regulation, for instance. We talk about ills that we find further downstream when leaders start to do certain things, but it's whether we have socialized leaders at a primary level, at a family level, talking about primary socialization, around issues of self-regulation. So what do you do if all of a sudden you are made responsible for 20 billion rands, 100 billion rands, 200 billion rands? Are you able to exercise self-regulation? And these things are about the self and the leading of self. And I think Good News is touching on where perhaps we get it wrong, Dr. Pat, at the foundations of where we get it wrong. Because if that building block is not intact, whatever we build on top of it becomes a challenge. Maybe let me stop there in my commentary.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much. I just want to go back to Good News and ask a question, a simple question. In your view, as you take us through this, should there be a clear golden thread from what I get taught or what I observed from a primary level to where I am today within a broader society where I'm playing a top leadership role? If I did not get it right from a basic point of view, could that be a clear indicator that I'm going to fail going forward?
Definitely, yes. Let me just take us through maybe 3 or 4 levels of development alongside the personality that we have, with all the good things that we offer to society, to relatives and everybody. When we are born, we become egoistic. Everything revolves around the self. We know this from babies. If they need a nappy change or they need a feed because they're hungry, they don't care about what you're doing at the time and they can't wait. And at that point, they are very much dependent on the support of the parent. So they live a dependent life and they live a self-oriented life. But over a period of time, these babies grow and they become socialized to understand what is good and what is bad. But even at that point, the motivation for the socialized person is driven by reward and punishment, so to speak. So they haven't yet gotten to that stage that my brother was talking about, being able to self-regulate. They don't have the tools, neither do they know anything about self-regulation. So even when they feel they experience trauma or they experience the extremities of the 3 emotions I mentioned earlier, anger, anxiety, and shame or sadness, they need the support of the parent. And then over a period of time, they go past that stage of just working with reward and punishment. And the identity actually comes out at that point. They start questioning themselves, who am I? And they start shaping what they present to the world. Obviously influenced by the parents, influenced by society that they grew up in. And furthermore, once they have gone further than that, they get into the integral stage. That's what the integral model that I was trained in from a coaching perspective explains. And at that point, the person then gets to have more than just self-interest, more than just close family interest, and more than just their tribe. And they go into serving complex systems. They could be a head of a complex organization. Yes, like my brother said, leading and being responsible for 400 billion rands as one of the measures, or even being responsible for hundreds of thousands of people as a leader of a particular organization. So when you get to that point whereby you have developed beyond just being driven by the ego and self-interest, you become a better leader that is able to take the interest of complex system and feed and lead that system so that on the whole, the system succeeds, rather than even you yourself or you and your team become the focus of attention. So if you miss all these stages and we are still egoistic, like we can sort of observe from some of the leaders that we have seen in our country, seen in the SADC region, seen on the continent, seen across the world, leaders who just serve narrow interests. Those narrow interests could just be their own self-interest or even their own nationality. We talk about narrow nationalism nowadays. So if we follow and push for narrow nationalistic kind of ideas, we are highly unlikely to be the great leaders that you are talking about, Ted.
No, thank you so much. But maybe let me just invite Ngobani. Can you respond to what I'd asked Good News earlier on? Do you have something to say before I move on? Ngobani, are you there?
Apologies, I'm back. I think we do have fault lines in our developmental cycle, and I think we can't. I mean, we've got a history in our country, and we've got a history as a people, and these fault lines will be experienced in our adult life. And I am of the view that your question was whether can this be remedied? Can this be?
Yes.
Can we put some plaster? We break the foundation and remake the foundation. I believe we can remedy some of the fault lines. I think I would be wrong in my submission if I think that these things cannot be fixed. I think these fault lines firstly must be understood where they come from, and then we then prescribe, as Good News is alluding to. We then prescribe what needs to be done, and when the prescription is put forward, very important that the individuals involved become party to the realization that I've got deficiencies as a leader, because you see, we've got pride, we've got proud leaders, we've got the ego that Good News talks about, that doesn't allow people, that put people with blind spots that they cannot help themselves on. And therefore, I am clinically answering your question. I'm of the view that these fault lines can be mended with the requisite level of acceptance and rigorous training, because skills development covers 360 of a human being. And I'm of the view that if one is open as a leader and is not egoistic to the degree that they cannot see their own blind spots, these fault lines should be closable, if I may.
No, thanks, gentlemen. Let me also talk to our guests that they are allowed to engage us via the chat. But back to Good News. Let us talk about corporate South Africa now being or supposed to be an organizational learning. Do you, in your view, think that corporate South Africa is basically grabbing the opportunities to learn from our past mistakes such that we can shape the future? And I'm going to go back to Ngobani thereafter. Your views,
yes.
Good News, and why do you say so?
Yes, corporate South Africa can actually contribute to the betterment of society. But if you look at the model that I presented earlier on around how we progress from the ego all the way to the top of the scale, and also what Ngobani said just now, it becomes a voluntary process. At the level of an individual leader, there must be an acceptance that the leader himself or herself has got faults and blind spots that need to be worked on. And then also as a collective, corporate South Africa, I think to a large extent, there is a kind of a huge psychological blind spot that sits around boards, around executive teams that you see around corporate South Africa. And that blind spot moves from a position that says we are okay. So whenever then one or a collective says they are okay, it means now those remedies that Ngobani mentioned cannot be used to actually improve the situation. Because training and education is not on its own, of its own accord, giving us the chance. I mean, even when we define learning from a technical point of view, we define learning as a change of behavior as a result of having gained new knowledge. So if there is no consciousness to actually change behavior because I believe I'm okay, the way that I am, even more sophisticated methods like coaching and even collective learning that happens within organizations may not be effective. So there is a kind of a thing also, if you go back to what I presented around the worldview, that worldview that is strong, that says we are okay, is a very big blind spot for corporate South Africa. Many leaders, as individuals and as collectives, find themselves in situations whereby they believe no one can teach them anything. So you'll find that in the lower levels of organizational structures and also in the middle, there is a great appetite for learning and growth and change. But as you go into the higher echelons of leadership and with executive teams and boards, you find that there's a reluctance to take in new knowledge, to take in new ways of leadership, and to also introspect and ask ourselves a question, like Ngubani was saying. Because in order for me to get to be able to answer the question as to what my identity is, I have to ask myself a question that says, who am I? And that question, I can't answer it just once. There are many aspects of the self that I have to cover for me to be able to understand who really my self is. And if I stick to just the political identity, I'm Black, I'm male, that is not enough. We have to go deeper than that. We have to go deeper and understand what drives me. We have to go deep and understand what my blind spots are, what are my gifts to the world, and also to find out whether I am open to building relationships that will improve the mandate of the leadership role that I've been given. So it is a complex issue, but on the overall, my own personal experience says there is a very limited appetite for growth and change insofar as leadership in corporate South Africa is concerned.
That is very scary. That is very scary. But we've got these platforms to engage on these issues. Now, let me move on to Ngubani. Ngubani, what are your views? Do you think leadership is born or is made? And if it is made, what are the critical success factors that we need to basically integrate at a lower level, such that by the time we get people at senior level, at least there's some clarity? Your views, and I'm going to come back to good news to basically have some say on the issues of the day. Let me start out yourself, Ngubani.
Yeah, a long debated subject. I'm in the school of thought that says we make leaders, while some have got predispositions and are born with certain skills, but I generally believe that with the right mindset, you can be taught how to lead and to lead successfully with impact. So I'm in that school of thought that says leaders can be grown, whilst acknowledging that there are people that may be endowed with certain qualities that, if you follow the traits theory, that may position them in an ability to lead. You know, I was observing just the other day, good news, that there are things that my son is able to do at 10 years old, because when he's 5, he learns certain things that are qualities of leadership in the household. And that's why I argue that the family is the basic unit of society, and therefore there are lessons on leadership that must be taught at that level. So I believe that we make leaders through lifelong learning. We can become better at it. If we look at decisions that we made when we were junior leaders in organizations and we compare to what decisions we're able to make today, it shows the quality of the decisions because of the change in behavior as a result of information that has come into our realm, whether formally or informally. So I'm in the school that believes that we can learn leadership. But there are things that must happen to position us to be able to at a very young age. I still believe that the ethics of a home are very important in the formative years of a child. The ethics of hard work, the ethics of getting, of earning a fair wage, or an honest wage, rather. The concept and the construct of accountability and responsibility, all of which come into our later thinking around what ethical leadership is. When we talk about moral identity and moral responsibility, these are things that at a home we start to talk about. I guess that's why the Bible, pastor after all, that's why the Bible starts to talk about in Psalms 127 that unless the Lord builds a house, those that try to build it in vain, because these are, in my realm, these are spiritual principles that Good News would sell you, but they are biblical nonetheless. So I'm of the view that that justice, the ethos of respect, of integrity, of responsibility, transparency, these are things that must be inculcated at a very young age. Today, you find our youth that do not have an inclination towards these values. So value-based households becomes very important. What are our values in this household? And when our children walk away, people can point, in fact, they can actually in their minds map up a schema of our household simply because they look at this child and they can understand that this child must be coming from a household that looks like this. So I'm of the view that these are things that should be able to teach. And by the way, I'm convinced that it's an opportunity area that we miss in our households, because what do you tell your children when you're sitting as a father or as a mother, single parent? What do you tell them about leading? Some of us confront leading far down the line, and in our upbringing, we've never been made to understand that we can lead, we can influence, we can drive positive results, we can build things from nothing. And because we don't have significant others in our lives at a very young age that can influence us, role models, for instance, and role modeling at a very young age, the influential people have left our townships and have gone to the leafy suburbs of the north. And our young boys and girls in the township are left with no role models. And therefore, the etiquette of leading and the art of leading, they're not able to model it from somebody that they see at close range through passive or active mentorship. So I am of the view that those are things that we should start to inculcate. What are the values in the house? What are the community values that we want to inculcate? I've mentioned a few. And as youngsters start to grow in their formative years, when they are tendered for influence, we should be able to make sure that we capture them at that point. And excuse the word of the use of the word capture. Thank you, Pet.
Thank you so much. Well said. But I would want to hear some views from Good News on what I've asked before I move on to the next point of discussion. Good News.
Well, because of what Ngwani has said, and also my own experience, is that leaders are both born and made, because you make them because they exist. And because from the formative years up to adulthood, they are learning all the time. They're being molded all the time. So they are being made at that time. So there is a kind of an oscillation between nature of the person because of the mold that they are made of, and also the nurture of the person because of whom they've associated with as they were growing up. The mixture of the two then creates the kind of leader that we encounter in public, even at home, and even in society in general.
Now, I want us to talk about the following Good News. What are the glaring leadership failures that we can talk about at a household level that will help save the day tomorrow?
Well, at first is the breakdown of the social fabric insofar as the family unit is concerned. I don't want to actually provide an adjective to the kind of families we have, but I would like to say that the family unit does not have the same features that it had before. A mother, a father, and a strong circle of elders around this young mother and father until such time they themselves become part of the circle of elders as they grow up. So that is the first part, I think, that is a big failure as we observe society in South Africa today. The incidents, the teachers will tell you, those who are educators in the audience, they encounter more of a single-headed households where there's a single parent kind of feature. And in the end, the reciprocity and the alignment and the kind of twinning that happens between mother and father is very rare to find. Even in situations whereby both the mother and father are there, they do not have the values that Ngobani mentioned earlier on. The values that honor the creator of the family unit, such that everything that they do is within the realm of those values. So there is a strong need to actually strengthen the family unit in order for us to have the kind of leaders that we want. That's what I would say in summary.
No, thank you so much. Let me get back to Ngobani. What are some of the glaring leadership issues that we need to deal with? I would think that some of our leaders, they suffer from self-preservation, and it becomes an issue that some of the youngsters look up to, whereas I would say it's just a sickness that we need to deal with. Let me get your views, Ngobani, on that.
Sure. So I'm of the view that it's critical that we make our young ones at an early age to understand that we are stewards of whatever that lands on our hands. Meaning, by the time we leave it, it should be organically of a better value than it was bequeathed to us. So self-preservation is a selfish stance that is in direct opposition with the construct of stewardship. So my sense is that broadly, we need to start to make people understand at a very young level that whatever you're going to be given, today people feel very entitled. There's a culture of entitlement. And with the culture of entitlement, once I've gotten it, I need to make sure that I am fully preserved by all means. And then it's about me. And I subscribe to the leadership shift that says, it's no longer about self. It's increasingly about the other, so that we teach our children that before you can even think about self, you must also consider other, or you must be able to consider the two in tandem, so that we are able to fight this self-preservation that you are talking about. I mean, I believe that if you get given a water plant in Rooiwal to take care of, and you get given money to look after it, if you are a steward, you are saying, how far do I stretch this money? I know it's scarce and it's scant. How do I make sure that I deliver the best? Because it's not about me, it's about the other. So I think at an early age, we need to teach our boys and girls, young adults, that you must have a steward mindset. That's why I love the thinking around steward leadership, because I am of the view that if we are able to deal with those issues of selfish tendencies that are out there, we would be able to make an impact. But let me also say, I think to the earlier point that you had asked, I think there is a moral breakdown that needs to be addressed in our society as a whole. I mean, how do you, if you're raising a child in a house that has got electricity that is connected illegally, and it's fine in the house, and there is nothing that is untoward about this, the child gets to learn. And I think my brother Good News touched on this issue of primary socialization. When the child is at home, he sees this and he sees a wire that comes from the neighbor, says, no, there's no need to be lawful. It's fine to be lawless. And this becomes ingrained in their psyche. And we will see it later in their mature years when it starts to surface again, because it's sitting in their subconscious as a way of thinking and of doing. So I'm of the view that the moral regeneration is very important at a basic community level and family level, so that we are able to deal with the issues. Our children, by the way, are growing in situations where a family, because as Good News puts it, we've got a lot of child-headed, a female or single parent-headed households. We are not in a
we've lost you, Ngobane. You've just by default gone into a mute mode.
Okay, sorry, apologies. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Let me wrap up on my point. So I was trying to say, in an environment where you've got single parent households, where there is no pairing, you also are struggling with some of these teachings that must take place. That's why I argue that mentorship and coaching needs to be ingrained in our communities and societies, and we need to create critical mass of mentors and coaches that can go back to their society to shape the life of these young ones as they grow up. It won't help us for all of us to crowd Silver Lakes and Sandton and Bishop's Court and wherever, and forget to go back to those rural areas that we come from, those townships that we come from, to actually build from the base, because I think we're going to need to do exactly that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see one of our guests, Babu Hlakaniphane, has got his hand up. Come in, Babundosi. You've got the platform, Babundosi. But my guy, we can't hear you.
Sorry, Doc. I touched it by mistake. Sorry. Take me out.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, no, thanks. Now, I see that we've got some of our regulars here. And then just before I go back to Good News and Ngobane to do what we call a call to action, I just want to call upon some of our regulars here. And then deliberately, I'm going to go to Professor Mek Ntombela and ask him to have some say here. Prof. Ntombela, would you want to have a say on the issues of the day?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, sir. Thank you so much. You may proceed.
Okay. Now, firstly, just to apologize that I had some connectivity issues and I joined quite late. And, so I didn't get everything that was shared, but thank you for the powerful messages that you are getting. I had a question and a comment. I think the question is for Ngobane, who much earlier on spoke about fault lines that may exist in leadership, and said that those fault lines can be fixed. I agree with that, but I just want to check what the impact on trust issues when those, I mean, after those have been fixed. Is there no challenge in terms of the people who are following and their level of trust when that has happened. And then the other comment also comes from what Ngobani said and about, I mean, with the example of electricity and the examples that we show, etc. I think it's very true what he has said. And I think as a society, we have started thinking that being unethical is when millions are involved. We do not see unethical behavior in small things. You know, people can be very shocked at the millions that are stolen and feel very comfortable abusing the telephone network, for instance. So I think because most of the time we publicize big scandals, we think that ethical behavior is only expected when you are given a lot to look after, like the 400 billions we're talking about. But I think even in small things, we still have to be ethical. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Ngobane, I'm going to ask you to hold on for a while. I just want to bring in Chris. Chris, please have your say on the issues of today, and then we can go back to both Good News and Ngobane. Chris?
Okay, no, thanks, Dr. Pat. Yeah, also had a bit of a network issue, so I missed some of the conversations, but I would think I will comment on the first important core fundamental, which was raised by Good News in terms of the starting point being the self-leadership. So understanding oneself is very much important, and also how does one fit into a collective, be it in a family, be it in a community. So I think that is the most important part, which I think many people are lacking in terms of understanding oneself, because once you do not understand yourself, you will misrepresent yourself. You will always believe that whatever you do is what is that as good practices, whereas it is not. So it's very much important to understand your strengths and your weaknesses, and how does one interact with the bigger, with the broader forum, be it society, in terms of ensuring that the leadership that starts in families is also expressed outside, be it in schools, in leadership, roles in churches, everywhere in government and in politics. As we see today, we've got leadership bankruptcy in the country because of from families. We are struggling. Families are disunited. Families are pointing each other with fingers because of they can't agree even on small fundamental issues. So I think it's very much important to start with creating family bonds, community, social interaction, to ensure that we can be able to build from the small circles into a bigger community. Because of if we struggle within our families where we've got control of how things should shape, then we cannot be able to control other people outside our families, be it leadership in organizations where you need to lead a group of diverse people. So I think that is very much important. So I think I was very much impressed with the foundational phase, which we all need to start in terms of self-leadership before you can lead others, because you can't lead other people if you cannot lead yourself. You need to have self-management, understand what is priority, understand what is important for you to be able to then guide other people to follow whatever your demonstration as good leadership. But most importantly, start with a family background. So I think that's what I wanted to say. Thanks very much, Dr. Pet.
Thank you, Chris. Shall we go back to Ngobane? Please attempt to give some views on what Prof had raised. And once we've done that, I will then go back to Good News and ask for 1 or 2 points in terms of the call to actions, and as yourself as well. Over to you then, Ngobane.
Sure. So The World Values Survey and the Afrobarometer tells us that trust generally over the last 3 years has plummeted. Trust in leaders, business leaders, trust in government leaders. So we accept that the fault lines will impact trust, but we also know that trust as a construct can be repaired, and it's difficult, but trust can be repaired. I mean, there is one organization that much earlier in the 2000s was found in a bread scandal, and they did certain things that made them to recover the trust of consumers. And I recall share price at the time around 160, plummeted to less than 100. Today it's at 279 rands a share, because there were things that were done by leaders that took upon themselves to understand what had gone wrong. So I think trust repair is possible under certain circumstances. Let me also just be quick to say there are 3 dimensions of trust that are very important. There is, and it depends then where the fault lines are in terms of your ability to recover. So if it's about competence and your fault line as a leader is competence, that's one dimension. The route to recovery or the pathway to recovery is different. If it's about benevolence and how you care for people and your constituency, and you fail there, it will affect trust. And again, your recovery mechanism is different. But I must quickly say the 3rd dimension where trust is formed is at an integrity level. It's a 3rd dimension, a very crucial dimension. Research tells us that it's much more easier to repair. That's why governments can mess up and still be voted on the next year. If it's about competence, if it's about benevolence. But generally, if it's about integrity, if the fault line is an integrity fault line, it becomes very difficult to recover. So I think it's important, Prof, that we understand that the fault lines exist at different dimensions, and if those fault line manifests, the route to recovery is different. In some instances, you may never recover, and you may need to remove leaders from position of leadership because it's just an integrity fault line, and we cannot afford it as a citizenry or as shareholders or stakeholders. But it can be a competence issue where we really feel that you could have done better on this issue of load shedding, but you were not able to. And we start to understand where are your gaps. And maybe your gaps are that you're not a technical person, you're a financial, commercial person. And how do we then shore you up with the right type of people around you so that the problem can be solved? So I am of the view that, yes, trust is taking a knock. Evidence is out there empirically. I'm of the view that the route to repair is different depending on what the fault line is. And I'm arguing that empirical evidence tells us that if its integrity lapses and failures, you must do a wholesale removal, my brother, good news, and make sure that you replace bad apples with good apples. That's the decision. That's the decisive leadership that is important when there is integrity lapses and fault lines that we experience. I guess I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Ngoban. That was quite a very good response. I want to go to Good News. Good News, what kind of call to action could be made in this instance?
Well, it's a very good question to close with and to sort of call for something to be done. And I'll cover it in 5 points. The first point, in terms of call to action, I think we should call on families to be strengthened. And for those leaders who support family development, like your spiritual leaders, like your community leaders, they should focus on ensuring that the social fabric is repaired at the level of family. Whenever there is a need to support a family in need, not necessarily from a material point of view only, but from a values perspective. Because without creating these strong values that Ngobane was talking about, it becomes difficult to even judge whether a person is authentic or not, because there is no scale to measure against. And then the four areas sit just outside the family, but at a larger collective. And I would like to call upon the private sector as a collective and say they need to change the way they see the world. They need to change the way they see their role in actually getting South Africa and the continent to be a better place to live in. There seems to be a kind of abdication of leadership by the private sector leaders, thinking that everything leadership belongs to government, and government must create the environment for which all the other things can be done, like profit making and all sorts of other stuff. But I think private sector leadership must take a responsibility and know that at least 25% of national leadership belongs to them. In order to change South Africa to be a better place, to change this continent to be a better place, private sector leadership will have to take charge and take ownership of that and do things that will make them to be better placed to assume that responsibility. The non-profit sector, I think, has got a lot to contribute to the betterment of society because they are closer to communities as a sector. And also, on the other hand, because they are sponsored by the private sector, they are closer to that as well. So they become the ham in the sandwich between the private sector and the public sector, which then is inclusive of the communities and society in general. The third call to action is that the collective of public sector leadership needs to understand that they are there for the sake of public good, not to enrich themselves personally, not to enrich themselves as friends and family. If they can actually take that mandate that they are given to lead from a public sector point of view and leading these entities that are created for public good, including government itself, we will have a better society. They should define what it really means to be a leader in the public sector and make it very difficult for anyone to assume public office if they are not worthy, if they don't have the integrity that Ngobane was talking about. And then the last one is around the cooperative sector. This is now the ownership of commercial entities by collectives of societies, where societies or communities get together to own a means of production so that in the end, they can create what the public sector and the private sector are not able to. Even then, if I'm going to assume leadership for a cooperative that is owned by the communities that I'm serving, I have to ensure that it's not for my own personal gain. It's not only for my family. It's for the community that has asked me to manage the entity on their behalf and foster good relationships amongst the members of that organization that owns the means of production as a community kind of grouping. Once all of these four pillars work together and there's a common thread that runs through private, public, non-profit, and cooperative sector, it's only then that we can build a set of nations in all the nation states that we find on the continent so that we can become a better society. That is my call to action.
Yeah, good news. Before I go to Nobile for his call to action, I wanted to comment on one last part. What would be your views in terms of naming and shaming when it comes to bad able leadership?
Research that I have looked at does not have any indication that anybody on earth has ever been shamed to change and become correct.
Okay.
Shame is the worst form of motivation for change.
Okay.
There should be other means used to actually get leaders to change the way they behave. If they are off the mark in terms of what is required of them, other means other than shame should be used to correct them.
Thank you so much, sir. Shall we move on?
Some of the things that can be used, it's actually to increase their self-awareness so that they are more aware of who they are and who they are becoming, to get them to be more aware of the mandate that has been given to them, and to create consequences for veering off the mandate that they've been given. So it should be easy to arrest people and send them to jail, and that in itself, shame will come, but is not the major thing there. You are taking people to jail because you are punishing them for doing things which they are not supposed to do. Currently, leaders in South Africa across the four pillars that I mentioned earlier on get away with practically murder, and no one is calling them to order, and no one is holding them accountable for the failure of leadership, whether it is at home or in a public entity or in a private entity or in a non-profit kind of entity or even in a cooperatively owned entity. People just do what they want because they can, and they can get away with it.
Now, thank you so much. Let me go to Ngubane. Ngubane, I would want you to give us your views in terms of some call to action, but also what I would want you to talk about in your closing statement is you started quoting a few verses from the Bible, and I want to say some of our leaders, what they say with their lips is different to what their actions say. And I wanted to talk about that in terms of how does it then role model what is out there from a young age of that child to when he or she becomes an adult, having seen what that person says something, but they do something completely different. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. I think it becomes very important that we are able to celebrate good leadership. We're able to celebrate good leaders. We lift them up into a pedestal if they are good, ethical, hard-working leaders. That's how we are able to differentiate for both our children and ourselves the wheat from the chaff. Because we keep on lifting, we would have to keep on lifting the wheat and say this is the standard. In South Africa, what happens today in our communities is that even the most committed counselor is not recognized, not celebrated, is not encouraged. And what we do is we are able to step forward whenever there is bad leadership. I wonder whether there is leadership and bad can be used in the same, but let's do so. Whenever there is bad leadership, we are able to then be vocal. I mean, how many times have you come across a community praising its good ward councillor, saying, you know, this man or this woman is the real deal because of the following things. So I think we need to lift up. I'm calling on us as citizens, firstly, to be active citizens. So I'm calling for active citizenry, coupled with lifting up leaders that are the standard, so that we can start to show what it is that we are looking for in leaders. I'm calling for spiritual awakening. I believe that at some point as a country, we said we want to go on a journey of moral regeneration. And we we abandoned the trip at some point, and I think it was under President Mbeki. And we left that trip along the way. And I still feel that it's very important for us to circle back into that agenda of moral regeneration and spiritual awakening in our communities, so that we can set a standard around what is acceptable. I believe that it becomes quite important that as we move forward, that we start to call again for maybe underactive citizenry. I'm worried about responsible followership, because we talk about responsible leadership. I'm very worried about the quality of the followers that we are becoming as South Africans, as citizens. I want to be counted as a citizen that is a responsible follower. When I meet my leaders, they must feel the quality of questions I'm asking. I must be very plugged into what's happening in my community and in my nation, such that the type of engagements that my leaders face when they come for campaigns soon, electoral campaigns, they must confront active and responsible followers that are asking the right type of questions. I'm also arguing that in as much as people say one thing and do another, the good book says you shall know them by their fruits, and it's never the words. And I'm challenging and calling South Africans to not be smitten by good words and eloquent words, but to look for the fruits, to look for what is the congruence between what one is saying and what one is doing. Because if there is incongruence, you know, the word integrity means you are whole. You are whole in what you say, you are whole in what you do. So if you are saying one thing and doing another, you are no longer whole, you are no longer integral. Therefore, you lack integrity. So we go back to the issue of, if leaders say one thing and do another, they disqualify themselves from being leaders. And I'm calling South Africans not to tolerate leaders that have long disqualified themselves from leading. And therefore call them into accounting. So I'm calling us as a collective to be responsible followers, to be active citizens, to make sure that we again circle back, Nzima, to ensure that our leaders hold the integrity. They have the integrity that is required for them to lead us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, part of our modus operandi within the TLG 365 is not to basically use up all the time. When we feel that we've exhausted the key issues, we then take a decision to stop. Right here, I would want to invite Chris to issue a vote of thanks for us, and then we should plan to conclude from there. Over to you, Chris. Hi, Chris, are you there?
Okay, no, thanks, Dr. Pet. I was trying to pick the right spot for the network. It's just being unreliable. Okay. Okay, no. Thanks very much for the opportunity. So I think first and foremost, I would like to thank the guest speaker, Good News, for unpacking this very important topic very well. So I think he has given a practical explanation of how this concept of leadership in families is all about, and also how this leadership from families extends beyond the family in the community, in corporate organizations, in government, and in political cycles. So I think most importantly, we can all agree that any form of a leader comes from a family. So whatever the leadership which a leader displays elsewhere outside, somewhere, somehow, it draws its origin from the family which the leader was brought up, but also not forgetting environmental influence, whereby someone may grow up in a family that upheld integrity, good behavior, and morals. But once a leader leaves the family and then goes out and then get mixed with other people and then is influenced by other environmental factors, that's when a leader will also then deviate from what is expected from a leader as a moral standard. So I think we can also agree that obviously when we look at our families all over the country, I think we can clearly see that there are a lot of cracks in families. Families are disunited. Families are affected by mistrust among family members, as we see that there are situations where family members are at loggerheads with each other for family issues and other issues. So as we see now, in the olden days, we knew that as families will gather from time to time and eat together, celebrate. But now we see when we've got events, some of the people are even afraid to eat at family gatherings or family events because of the experience they had, where we see some of us or some of the members of families being targeted at such gatherings. Hence, you find that now you are living as a family, but you don't trust each other. You see your family member as your enemy because of the experience which has been experienced by some of the people. So I think going back to the drawing board, as Good News has indicated, is for us to understand ourselves and understand how do we fit into a family, and then how does the family fit in a community, because of if a family is living what is considered as unacceptable behavior in a community, it means that family is a threat in that particular community, because of it can influence other families within the community into wrongdoing. So I think it's very much important. And then also going into how to take leadership further, I think where he indicated that what we see in our government today, we are having a serious weakness in our leadership in government, because of it seems like there's no defined standard of leadership. What is expected from leaders in serving the citizens is more about self-enrichment, more about benefiting your own comrades, your own friends and family members. So I think that is where things have gone wrong, where we need to go the drawing board. How do we position our leadership approach to the one of servant leadership, selfless leadership? How do we go back to such roots, which will then reroute us to families, that we need to ensure that our family development is strengthened so that we can be able to mold future leaders who will be able to understand that being a leader in government, be a leader of a political organization, you don't necessarily represent that organization, but you represent your family, you represent your community, so that we can be able to see some form of good leadership in you, which we can always relate to how you were developed in a family. And also on the what is also touched on leaders being both developed and born, I fully agree with that. So I think that is very much important. But also, I think some way, somehow, we can also see that we also have leaders who became leaders by default. They became leaders when they were not ready to become leaders. They were forced into leadership position because someone wanted to use them to benefit. So we've got someone who's put in a leadership position but does not understand what it entails to be a leader. So that person will be more like being manipulated by others around the circles to benefit out of that person. So I think, as we see even in organizations, there are people who are being put into leadership positions through nepotism, through corrupt dealings. So I think such people, when they go into leadership positions, they are not prepared and they are not willing to exercise leadership in a way of integrity, but they are there to advance certain agendas. So I think it's very much important. And also through cooperatives, as Good News has indicated, that we've seen many cooperatives which were started, had a clear vision and mission. They were funded. They had a good start, but somehow, because someone wanted to be greedy and wanted to benefit him or herself with his or her own family, and then now the group had to suffer because of his normal, like the finances were now channeled to certain individuals. So I think that is where we are failing to say we need to be able to work as a collective, but not to advance our self-interest. So I think that is also another important element. So on the call to action, I think that's very much important to say, how do we take the learnings that we have learned from this leadership session, our families, to our other areas where we exercise leaderships, be it in government, be it in churches, be it in political organizations or in government. How do we take the learnings that we have learned from this session there? So I think that is where we need to see how do we create a mechanism where we can be able to coach nature and influence leadership in various circles. As you understand that there are people who would like to maintain the status quo, so they are not receptive to any form of coaching, even guidance. They want to do things their own way because of that is what benefits them. So they don't have a bigger picture in terms of how to exercise leadership and how to ensure that your leadership is impacting positively on other people. So on the other part where the part of naming and shaming, I think I also agree with his view to say sometimes shaming can be a motivation. So I think as we see in political circles, there are a lot of wrong things being uncovered, but we see our leaders do not have any conscience. They will go all the way to defend whatever wrongdoing, which is clear for everyone to see, but they will still deny. I think we also touched on the issue of the current crisis of load shedding. I think there are media reports about what has led to this situation, but who is coming clean and accept that we failed somewhere, somehow, to have foresight in terms of how to prevent or avoid this situation. So we see a lot of defensive mechanism in terms of what led to the current situation, although there's clear signs and even evidence which suggests that the situation which we are in was by design, but not by lack of knowledge or awareness. But there was no foresight or planning ahead to ensure that we are able to have a vision for the nation. So unfortunately, we are stuck. So we are hoping that there will be leadership intervention to try and resolve the situation. And also, I would say I would like to thank Nawani for his insights, thought-provoking. So I think this is the kind of discussion which we need to be able to open up our mind, to be able to say things in a broader way, because of some of the things we see them all the time, but we accept them as norms. So, but I think if we have this kind of discussion, we can be able to do self-introspection to see how are we contributing towards the development of our families, our country at large. So I think we also need to go back to take stock in terms of whether are we exercising good leadership in our families, are we influencing our families in the right direction, because of somehow there are areas which I think we can do much better than we are currently doing. So let us try to unite our broken families. I think any one of us here can relate to a family dispute which might have been there for a long time and then unresolved. So I think we can always go back to try and see how do we initiate honest discussion amongst our families to see how can we resuscitate our family unity. How do we ensure that as a family we carry a shared vision, because of the success of a family is the success of everyone in the family. So it must not be seen as someone's victory. So we need to make sure that we are able to uplift each other. So as a family member, if I've got something which I believe I can help other fellow family members who are struggling to make ends meet, I think I should be able to step up and see how do I assist. Although I cannot solve every problem in the family, but I think the little contribution that one can make will be meaningful. So I think that is where we need to go back to the roots to say, how do we, as families, strengthen each other to ensure that we're able to succeed as a family, and as a family, how do we contribute to the success of a community? And as a community, will then take it to a broader area to ensure that that then reflect at the national level. So I think that is the key take home, which I will say I have obtained from the session. And most importantly, I think this leadership session has touched us in many different ways due to the different leadership topics which have been discussed. So I think, Dr. Pett, I would also like to thank you for this continuous session. I think when it started, I think it was more like a once-off project, which it was more like based on that particular leadership topic at that stage. But I think through after the first session, it then gave yourself the appetite to move it to the next level. So I think I will say well done, and then I say I wish you all the best going forward in hosting these kinds of sessions, and also thanking all the guests who have been listening. So I think let us go out there to use these learnings to see how do we influence leadership in our families, our communities, and in our leadership roles that we exercise in various spheres of society. So thanks very much, Dr. Pett and everyone.
Thank you so much, Chris. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the leadership game, TLG 365, all things leadership. Colleagues, may I invite you for the next session, which is going to take place on the 24th of June. Our theme is anti-corruption leadership. I think it's important that we invite a lot of our colleagues to join us. Let us just have an open conversation about anti-corruption leadership. We can see where corruption is taking the country, but at least if we talk about these things, make some call to actions and start going influence those things offline, things could change. That being said, may I thank each and every one of you, and let us come to an end right now. God bless you. Have a blessed evening. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.